Hello and welcome back, this is ProTaleDev, back with another Game Jam video, and this time it's the Trijam Game Jam that I took part in a few days ago. So basically this Game Jam ran from the 3rd of March to the 6th of March. It was a 3-hour Game Jam, and the reason I chose a 3-hour Game Jam is because I haven't done a really short Game Jam in a long time, and I really felt like I wanted a challenge to try and make a game that was really short. I did mention, I believe in the last video and the video before that, I wanted to do a bit more game jams that were shorter, and so I felt like this was a good place to start. We actually got 5 different themes that we could choose. I chose the very basic one, which is thin borders. Felt like I already had like a good idea of what I could do for it. Even though it was only 3 hours, you could actually prepare quite a lot, so you could create music, do art and things like that just before the game jam start, but you couldn't make the actual game. So you could create assets, but you couldn't create the actual game until you do it in 3 hours. However, it wasn't a set goal. People have gone over, which is perfectly fine. However, 3 hours was the time that I worked in. Now, I will say straight away, this was a very fun game jam. I really did enjoy it. There'll be some glaring issues with my game, as you'll see in a second, but ultimately I ended up pretty high in the results. Now, I'll show that at the very end, and I'll show the feedback that I got for the game. I did do a game jam previously that was only 2 hours, which was very difficult for me to make. It's one of my early game jams, and now I felt a lot more comfortable in this game jam, even though it was only 3 hours, an extra hour to that compared to that game jam, but I felt a lot more comfortable. Well, time to get actually into it. So first of all, this is what it is. It's the Aviary Breakout. I'm going to go into Unity, and I'm actually using the newest version of Unity, the Unity 2022 version. You can see my game right here, which is Aviary Breakout, and that kind of encompasses the theme, and I'll go over that in a second, how the theme works into this game. But ultimately I submitted it 14 hours just before deadline, which is pretty close if you consider how many days we had. And before I go into everything else, let's go into the actual game. So, first thing I did was set up a scene. Once I set up a scene and got familiar with some of the newer stuff on this game, on this Unity engine, I then made a build immediately, blank build, with the WebGL, and then tested it to make sure it works with a basic controller. The reason for this is because I've had issues in the past with WebGL on Unity versions where they don't quite work with itch.io, and so I made sure that that was solved immediately. So I made basically a test demoed version on itch.io to make sure that it was working, it can be exported to it. Once that was done, I basically started building this little level here. So it's very basic. I'm going to be compassing this in the hours, so the very first hour was me creating a box, which would be the border, and this is a good chance to talk about how this theme works. So this is going to be, the thin borders is kind of ironic, because as you can see, this is a very thick border. In reality though, and encompassing to the story that I've built, this is actually a thin border of glass that birds are trapped in, specifically one bird that wants to be free. It's in an aviary cage, essentially, a glass cage, so the bird can see outside for freedom, but it can't actually escape. And so it's ironic that the borders are huge when in reality they're actually thin borders of glass. You can see right here that we have a dot, and this is just the main menu, and this was the very basics of the first hour, but basically getting all the controls and everything in and all the scripts. So if I were to press play right here, so immediately what you can see is we've got a controller, very basic 2D game that I've worked on. Yeah, I decided to go for 2D instead of 3D because it was a little bit easier to get the assets. So immediately you can see that I've got a controller, it's just a dot, and I basically use basic shapes. And if I were to pause this for a second and then just show it in our game manager, you can see our scripts that we've made. So in the very first hour, I made sure to get all of the code done. Obviously I made tweaks in the final hour, but most of the code was finished in the first hour. So first of all, we got a spawner with 2 arrays right here, and these encompass the enemy spawn points and the weakness spawn points. Now the whole point of the game is to lure over other birds to break the walls, and these walls are going to have spawn points with every bird that spawns. You've got to try and lure the birds over into the weaknesses, and in order to weaken the borders. Every time you weaken them, it'll count up a score, and once that specific score is met, once the maximum is hit, then we'll move on to the next level, which is a bigger border, a bigger aviary that the owner has put you in, and eventually you're going to force the owner to basically set you free because you could keep trying to break out. So that's kind of the whole premise of the idea mixed with the theme. As you can see, what you do is you spawn, we just simply spawn our enemies in, so it's very, very basic code. There's some very, very basic stuff right here. Obviously 3 hours wasn't very much time, and I wanted most of the code, if not all of it, done in that first hour. So yeah, right here we got our basic spawns. We've got our array, which is just transforms, our different types of prefabs, our weak point and our enemy. We've also got everything that controls our time and how quickly they spawn. So it's just here, it's just a very basic spawning object. Whenever it's not the first level or the last level, then it'll spawn objects. We also have our level controller, which is specifically on the enemies. And so what happens is, if an enemy hits you, so you basically only have 1 life, it'll restart the current level you're on, not the whole game. It gives the player another chance to restart the level as they go. It's sort of like a bit of saving. And then we obviously have our player controller right here, so it's just moving the rigid body and using our controls right here. It's very, very basic controls. We've got our score that's been written on the text on our screen, and we've also got what levels control what based on how much our score is. So 5, 10, 15, 20, and then that just controls a bit of our movement. So very basic code right here. The other thing to mention though is that I wanted to try and do something quicker rather than a enemy follow system. In order to make up for time, I wanted to actually use effectors. So I used a point effector on the player, on this sprite right here. We have a point effector which basically draws in any objects that collide with it as an enemy. So any enemies that are in this area that are in this specific collider right here, if we go into our scene, you'll be able to see it a lot better. Anything within this collider that is considered an enemy on that specific collision layer, that's on the layer as enemy. So you can see our layers right here. We have enemy. Anything that collides with that will get pulled to it, and that's essentially our enemy follow. It's very, very basic, very simple, and it saved a lot of time. I was able to do this in less than 5 minutes, if that. And I haven't organized any of this because there wasn't a whole lot of time, but our original enemy was just this block right here. However, I eventually changed and added newer prefabs. Now you'll see immediately as the levels go, the color actually changes, and this is just to highlight the contrast of colors, because also the color of the background will be slowly appearing. I thought it just added a little bit of a nice touch. It sort of represents freedom getting closer and closer as more color appears, and you'll see that in a second. There is also these 2 other scripts right here, which is just destroy on for the weaknesses and for the birds. So essentially just 5 scripts that we got right here, but they're not too advanced. Also a quick mention that I brought in a bunch of sprites that I've worked on in previous game jams. Anyone will recognize some of these as being stuff that I've drawn from the past. I've redrawn some of them from older sketches. So things like the trees, the leaves and the flowers are all things that I've drawn myself, and so they were completely fine to add into the game jam. And that was done before I started working on the 3-hour project. So enough talking, let's actually play. Now immediately you're going to notice that there's no music or sound. This was one of the big feedbacks I got from the game jam, is that it really kind of diminishes the experience with no sound and effects, but ultimately I had no time. Now obviously you can see immediately where the weak points are. They're red boxes that have to be hit, and once it collides with an enemy it'll disappear. So there you go, there's one. On the top left you can see weak points, 1 out of 5. And at the very bottom you've got a little bit of text which explains the story, and each scene has its own continuation. Let's see if we can get to the next level. The blue spots I left specifically to show where the birds spawn, just to make it a little bit easier, because before you would just run into them and it was kind of a big pain. Another thing is lighting. I wanted it to make it seem like you were locked in a cage or in a box or something like that. So I felt like the lights was very important. And as you can see on the second level, we had a little bit more color. We have a background now, and we have the lights that are a little bit bigger. And when a bird hits me, it restarts the current level and not the whole level. So there you go. And I really do like the lighting effects, and this is something that the new Unity does. Basically, previously you'd have to do a bunch of installs and change the render pipeline in order to have lighting for 2D, and you'd have to do some very special stuff to get the shadows and stuff working. Now it's a lot easier on the new Unity 2022 to be able to have lighting in this scene. Now you'll notice immediately there's 2 birds but only 1 weakness. Some of the weaknesses are actually glitched out, but I think it's fine. It adds a little bit more challenge, I think, to the birds. Now this is very difficult, but that's also the reason why it only restarts the current level you're on. It makes it so that although it's difficult, I imagine it would have been too hard if birds had ended up restarting you all the way back to the beginning. I think it would be too difficult. Anyway, this is the second scene. Now I have made it all the way to the end, but after many tries. And also some people also made it to the 3rd level, and I believe 1 person actually finished. So praise on them, because it's tough actually to continue on. Anyway, so if we just zoom in into our scene right here, you can actually see them in real time what they look like. So first of all, we start off with black and white. Then it gets a little bit lighter, a little bit bigger, a little bit brighter, a little bit more colourful, and then until you got this final level right here. Now the final level is much harder. There's a lot of birds that spawn very quickly, and there's a lot more spawn points to worry about. The lighting's probably a bit too much. I realised that after the game jam ended on this scene, but as you can see, there's a lot more birds. And on this one you can actually just try and stay alive as long as possible, and birds will gradually start knocking into the walls, and that's one of the strategies that you could really use for this, is just trying to avoid as many as possible, and they will gradually go into these weaknesses. But it also makes it a lot of fun because they do hit each other and spin. That's intentional because it was a bug initially, but I kind of liked the fact that they spun around and rotated, because it was just hilarious to watch, and so I left it in instead of making the rotation frozen. So that's actually intentional. Now if they beat that one level, the owner will basically set you free. So yep, the owner set you free, you win, thank you for playing by ProTaleDev, and you can press space to play again, and that'll take you back to the beginning. So that's the very basics. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the rankings and the feedback, things like that. So we're on my page right here, which is accessible. You can just go to ProTaleDev and you'll be able to see it and even play it. It is played on a browser, so you don't have to download anything, so that's very easy to play. And as you can see down here, we've got our visuals, which was ranked 3, so our visuals are not too bad. We've also got how well does it fit, we're ranked 6th. Overall it's ranked 8th, which is not bad. You know, it was 22 entries I believe, so I believe this was pretty good. We've also got right here, how much did you enjoy the game overall, and it's a 9, so it's not great. It's still in the 10, so it's still above the 50% mark, but it's not great. And then also we got right here gameplay, which is 11, so people didn't enjoy the gameplay too much, but it was very basic, and you know, obviously this is only made in 3 hours, so of course it's going to be pretty basic anyway. And then we've also got audio. Now I ranked 20 on this. This is pretty low. The reason is because there's no sound at all and no music. I actually intended to make the music as bit music before the game jam started, and I ran out of time. I didn't have time to do it. That's why I also started the game jam really late, the day before it was going to end. I basically just ran out of time, and once I jumped into the game jam, there was just no time to make music. I could have looked online for royalty-free music that would fit. However, more than often than not, I end up taking a lot longer, so it could take me up to half an hour, maybe even an hour to find it. I just didn't have that time. I did have some sound effects that I was going to include, but again, I was running low on time as I was testing all these levels, so ultimately I ran out of time to do it. Now, consider there's no argument from me that this is completely fair, and it probably let down my score overall. I could have been a lot higher ranked. Overall I was ranked 8th. I might have been able to, if I had sound effects or music, I might have been able to push up to maybe 5 or 4, but overall that's not bad. I was pretty happy with it. So then we get into a lot of the feedback. So they enjoyed the art, which I drew myself, but they really wanted some sound effects at least, or some music. The quality and the lighting also add a little bit, and a lot of people did complain about the rotating of the birds, but I specify in the replies that this was intentional, because although it was a bug initially, I really thought it was funny and silly and kind of adds a little bit of character to the game. You know, sometimes a little bit of bugs that are fun help the game a little bit, and I thought it was a good distraction from the music a little bit as well. If they were just stationary, I think it would be a little bit more boring. People did say it was a little bit boring, but again, 3 hours, it's very difficult to make solid gameplay. Again, this person enjoyed the gradual increase in multiple birds. Obviously, we got a few people liking the goofy rotating birds and the fact that they hit each other, making it a bit more tricky. There's a few problems with the weaknesses, as I mentioned before, on the 3rd level. That's because the sorting layer is wrong for the weaknesses. And also someone had a really good suggestion right here, which is depending on which way the birds are moving, perhaps they should continue flipping in that direction. That way, instead of them being stationary, you could still keep the goofy rotating, but the rotation would indicate which direction they're going, which is a great suggestion. Obviously, people said that it was hard, but it would restart at the same level that you failed on. But I felt that was a good equalizer between the two of difficulty, but also being able to restart that level so you could just try it again immediately as opposed to starting the whole game again. If I go to submissions right here, you'll see that I did rate all of them. I tried to give feedback to as many as possible. Some of them just didn't need the feedback because a lot of other people had given feedback. So this was a very positive community of people that played this. There was actually 24 entries in total, 23 because obviously including mine, which you can't rate. I did my best to try and give us efficient feedback. So usually when I give feedback, I'll say what was good about it, then I'll say what's bad about it, and then I'll give some suggestion to improve the experience. That's usually how I give my feedback. And I try and be a little bit more detailed than other people to try and give a bit more back. But as you can see, yeah, I did my best to rate everyone and give as much feedback as I could, and it was really fun. And don't get me wrong, these games are amazing as well, so I totally understand our position. I thought that the ranking was correct as usual. The community is always honest about the game jams, and so I was pretty happy with it. So this was the Trijam 209, and it was the 3-hour game jam. If you want to check out Aviary Breakout, then definitely go and check it out. Free to play, and it's browser, so yeah, you can just go and check it out now. So this has been ProTaleDev, and I'll see you next time.